The presentation begins introducing the project as an architectural framework to then explain its purpose. This is followed by an explanation of the geometry, materiality, and a test implementation on a site in Hackney. The project began with my own experience of Hackney. A couple of months ago, I went on a walk around some of Hackney's most famous streets. I was using Google Maps and I followed the red route highlighted on the map. It took me around 1 hour and a half, and at some point, I started to realize that the green spaces where I was planning on stopping by to have lunch were all closed off or had timetables imposed on them. This forced me to have lunch in some of the worst urban conditions I've ever experienced, in the bench shown in picture left. This wasn't the only disappointment of the walk, as I saw most of the public space was actually being used as camping spaces for homeless people. This is not their fault, but rather it's a result of the economic system we live in and the hostile urban environment being an extension of it. The architecture that helps perpetuating inequality and fails at creating a built environment fit for use is designed to acquire the maximum exchange value, capital, rather than to be useful to society. Wouldn't it be great if, as architects, we could design an architecture that moves away from that in exchange for use value? This is a building that is about use and experience rather than producing capital. And this is because I see a disconnect between how people use buildings and how they are being produced. I am looking for a different type of architecture that wants to enhance the urban conditions with a strong social agenda and an inherent logic of multiple use. A form that at first sight appears unfamiliar, but is based on simple principles to allow for everything to be possible within it. It looks like this in order to have a variety of different uses that can change over time and carries with it a figurative element that is embedded in British culture with other framework projects such as the telephone box, the terrace house typology, or the bay window. It aims to bring down the barriers and timetables to Hackney's parks in order to transform them in local public centres, aim at solving local issues and become the bones for the city and be the centres of public life. Back in Victorian times, this was on a much smaller scale with the provision of basic facilities such as toilets, heating, or small pavilions in the green parks. This was discontinued after World War II, and shortly after, in the 1970s, the walls came up around much of London's park, following secure by design guidelines. Within Hackney, 3 sites have been identified as potential areas of intervention where the architectural framework could be implemented. The 3 sites have similar sizes and could be categorized as green spaces adjacent to main roads. The similarities between these green spaces become more apparent as you start to analyze its immediate surroundings. All of them have direct access to the main road, similar densities, and a great variety of uses around them. The sections across the green spaces show why small green spaces have become an urban problem in London. People don't want to visit them because there is no reason to. There is no program, and combined with the poor landscaping and lack of levels, bigger parks are far more attractive. The lack of people led to a lack of natural surveillance. Walls would pour up around these parks and they effectively became no man's land, or either way, had timetables imposed. On the other hand, there is a great existing green infrastructure on these sites, and this has the potential to turn these closed parks into the most attractive parts of the city. This is something to be protected and enhanced, as letting them deteriorate would only give developers an excuse to build profit-oriented architecture on them. The project is a network of interventions that are built with the same construction principles and host a variety of ever-changing programs which respond to the local needs of a community, specific to time and place. The first step is to define what are the local conditions and create community engagement. This will inform what are the correct sites, areas, and functions. Once that's done, the open system is implemented and its tectonics will enable it to host different programs and allow for change to happen around it. If we take a look at the demographics in Hackney, we can observe how the ethnicities and religions are very varied, same as age. This means that Hackney is a very diverse neighborhood, and when we overlap the social infrastructure, crime, and deprivation in Hackney, we discover that even though the 3 sites have practically the same urban conditions, the activities happening around the sites and its needs are completely distinct. Different people use the site at different times, carry on different activities at different times of the day. This obviously has an effect in terms of program and use on these sites. When we start to observe the relationship these 3 places could have, we can observe how different programs would fit better other places and how these programs can also start to be integrated and work with one another. The uses are divided into 3 categories: basic needs of an area in order to reopen the parks in a safer manner, uses specific to time and context, which can create jobs and revenue for the enterprise, and finally, uses aim to improve the social conditions. The social program can be connected across the sites and create a network of always improving society thing. Given the social nature of the project and the aim to improve the city and to create exchange value, the project is best suited to be a public enterprise. The project looks at multipurpose spaces, spaces that have spatial qualities that enable different uses to happen between them. The project, in a way, tried to learn from the terrace house typology as a shoebox, a simple element that allows many activities to happen within its walls. The typology of the terrace house is used throughout London to create streets, create frontage, and satisfy the needs of the city. On the other hand, the sites we're dealing with are completely irregular, and we want to preserve the green infrastructure on them. Hence, using the terrace house typology, something meant to create frontage, it's discarded. At the same time, the project aims these spaces to be public and open to everyone to visit them. This means a better interaction with its surroundings. On the project, the serving space becomes part of the envelope of the building, in a way enclosing the whole space. Whereas like the terrace house typology, it's used as a serving space, almost a technical facility. The starting point was to define 6 different scales that could be inhabited. Given their size, they have different capacities. This already categorizes them into possible different uses, given the amount of people that can visit them at the same time. The starting geometry of the circle gets divided into 20 equal parts. The resulting segments are rearranged to give the geometry of a circle intentionality and specificity. This creates a catalog of spaces capable of hosting different uses within the same spatial gesture. The resulting forms are divided in 2 levels, the ground floor for a public use and the level above for more social or uses specific to time and context. When seen in 3D, we can see how the footprint of the top is 50% less than the footprint at the bottom. This helps creating bigger spaces on the top floors, more uninterrupted, whereas like in the ground floor, the form starts to shape the space and the city. The pod's singular elements are brought together with the introduction of a horizontal slab. This slab, built with cast iron, brings the project together and helps creating spaces that are habitable on the levels above. The project has the ambition to become part of Hackney's long-lasting public infrastructure. On the other hand, we have seen how buildings are starting to last less and less and less as time goes on, to a point where some of the most important buildings of the 20th century, the Netherlands Dance Theatre for example, only lasted for 25 years. The project wants to get something else. The project wants to last for a very long time, wants to learn from the Victorian infrastructure like these pieces here, which were built with using cast iron and required very little maintenance, very little taking care of, and lasted for years and years. These are some early studies on how that material could start to have a figurative impact as well on the form of the project, similar to what the Victorians were doing back in the day. The structural solution tries to learn from that. It uses a steel skeleton that can be insulated inside or left without insulated depending on the use, and then this can be cladded over with cast iron sheets. These sheets can be very personalized and can even be adapted within different sites. They are also allowed for a lot of technical elements such as radiators, soffit mounted lights, and others such as shutters, pivotal windows, and open eaves to be installed. This gives the project a figurative element similar to what the Victorians were trying to do, trying to make people more familiar with what it is and trying to become part of the local culture. Here we can see how that material gets expressed into some of the critical parts of the project, with the choice for industrial materials, given that it's in central London where things tend to get very used. Also, reflective materials such as reflective glass gets placed around trees in order to maximize the green nature of the project. Here we can start seeing how deglazing gets implemented in between the halls, and in a way this helps inhabiting some of the spaces and giving them a use. The interior spaces carry on with the idea of using strong industrial materials, but on the other hand, they also try to bring some softer stuff such as wood finishes and so on in order to make people more comfortable inside. Let's not forget, though, that green is the most important material on the site, and in a way, the architecture tries to make green the main color of the project, rather than introducing new colors to it, tries to learn from the context. Out of the three sites, St. Thomas Square in Hackney is chosen to be the place where the project gets implemented. This site is located close to the LSA, right next to London Fields, and its main program is going to be refugee for homeless, cafe, bike parking, waste management, and water source for people. The satellite picture shows the amount of green infrastructure existing in the site at the moment. This information was taken into CAD, and the trees were triangulated in order to come up with a strategy to implement the project. The circulation around the site was also studied, and we came to the realization that the Mayan circulation was happening around these green spaces rather than just the green spaces as part of the city you can move across. Taking this into consideration, we started to implement the 6 different types of spaces. Here we can see how that fits in the intersection of the green line of the red lines. And once that's done, we start to, in a way, develop the typologies further and start seeing how circulation starts to work with the implementation of the forms, and all the trees, all the green infrastructure is preserved. What's more, it's not just preserved, it's also augmented. Levels are brought to the site, lower levels, higher levels, and also new paths reinforced with green infrastructure such as bushes and other landscaping. This results in a very organic floor plan that in a way reflects the idea that the project is developed for use value, for what's there and what's needed, rather than for exchange value. This image we can see how not only the green infrastructure has been preserved, but it's actually become part of the project. Here the image showing the northwest part of the site shows how the project in a way starts to bring a strong frontage to the street, but it also preserves all the infrastructure, starts to poke through it and in a way open ways to the green space behind. The uses given to a project are based on the research done previously that gets repeated here, and the conclusions were that startup spaces, homeless shelter, commercial space, and basic public amenities on the ground floor were the most interesting bits to be introduced here. The site gets divided into 4 different parts. This will help with the zoning of the site and in a way divide the uses. It's not the same thing to have a homeless shelter than to have a cafe, and these two shouldn't be right next to each other. As we start zooming into Zone 1, we start seeing how circulation starts to be more of a porous thing rather than in and out. The barriers between public and private and varied and nature starts to become part of the built architecture as well. The landscaping, in a way, starts to create barriers between the existing state and the new development, creating a series of thresholds and, in a way, amplifying what's existing there. Uses such as book exchange, bus stops, concert halls can be put in here, but let's not forget that this can also change over time. The views start to reveal these thresholds and start to show an architecture that's based upon use, on organicism and space making, rather than about making capital and exploitation. Here on the bigger image we can start seeing how that architecture starts to become alive, and in a way the color, the green, is the main protagonist, whereas like the project is sitting behind as part of a man-made infrastructure, helping us to habitate its spaces. Other parts of the development might have different characters at times, such as this one on the southern part. Here it's more public, it's more about art, culture and so on. So basic amenities, just exhibition spaces, artist workshops, bus stops, or even public toilets are used here. Here again we can start seeing how circulation, everything is going around the idea of organicism and working with nature. We are framing around the trees, we are respecting them, and that leads us to an architecture that's based upon these rules. The main access here we can observe from the west side towards the east, get rid of cars and starts to pedestrianize zones that before used to be used as car parking spaces. Other parts here perhaps start to lead and talk about circulation a bit more, with the access to the existing housing state, introducing of staircases that wrap around trees, and also create promenades facing the housing states there on the image in the middle. Other parts, perhaps the one here with the homeless shelter on it, tries to be a bit more private, starts to poke less into the street, and is more, in a way, self-referential. This doesn't forget, though, that it's about landscape and creates an agora there that helps creating what's called the DUP system, where rainwater can go through and also help with the water drainage of the site. Now, where here is more private, the trees, everything, the scale is slightly smaller. But in a way, that's also okay because it's part of the homeless shelters where these people are going to be living at. Here we can compare the existing section with the proposed one, and again we can see how this change of levels and the introducing of mats in a way helps opening up the park from certain amount of hours to 24/7. Zooming into the section reveals how this is articulated further with the introduction of green spaces, not only on ground floor but on level 1, in a way trying to amplify the biodiversity of the site. Also in red we can see the existing wall that was there before, how it gets removed, and in a way new thresholds get introduced. Vertical circulation happens between lifts and spiral staircases. The spiral staircases are oversized because they have a public nature and they are meant to be an anchor space within the project. They are distributed so the more public areas have direct access to these spiral staircases, and the lifts are serving the program that's hosted on level above. Again, we can start seeing how the public nature of the project gets shown here, with the walkway in clear being very obvious and the one in darker being a bit more private. In the level 1, the footprint of the forms is reduced, giving more space for enclosed open space to be created. This is quite handy if we are trying to create working spaces or cafes, but even homeless shelter can be accommodated here quite easily. Given the small depth of the spaces, natural ventilation can also occur without any issues, and more green infrastructure can be implemented on the platforms there. Zooming into the plan so you can see how they start to get articulated here. The arches are supporting the structure, and then access goes through the blue points there, which are rotating doors. Here the space shows how the amount of glazing tries to, in a way, enhance the idea that we are at the same level as the tree cups. This becomes part of the space and in a way becomes the main attraction of these spaces here. Also, we have big public walkways as we are having on the restaurant public area here, with direct access to a spiral staircase and places where you can sit down, have a cafe and interact with your neighbors. Here, for example, is the level 1 of the homeless shelter, which is more private and in a way tries to work in a more functional manner whilst still preserving the idea of living amongst the trees. To summarize, this is a compilation of images showing how the project lives amongst the trees and how we are trying to save the parks in Hackney. Thank you very much.